The dining room of Auberge d'Orval smelled the way old money always does. Like white truffle and quiet contempt, Hazel Fenwick had learned, in her 2 years working the floor of Montreal's most self-consciously elegant restaurant, that the smell wasn't accidental. It was cultivated. The truffle came from the kitchen. The contempt came from the clientele. She moved between the tables the way she moved through most things in her life, efficiently, without calling attention to herself, carrying more than anyone could see. A tray of crystal stemware in her hands, a $12,000 tuition bill in the back of her mind. Her mother's latest CT results folded into the pocket of her apron, still warm from the printer at the hospital on Côte des Neiges, where she'd stopped before her shift. It was a Thursday in late November. Outside, the first serious snow of the season was settling over the city. Like a verdict, inside Auberge d'Orval, the temperature was controlled to exactly 19 degrees Celsius, and the lighting was adjusted every hour by a system that cost more than Hazel's annual salary. She didn't mind the work. That was the thing people never understood when they looked at her. A woman of 31 in a white pressed shirt and black apron, hair pinned back, moving plates, and reciting the evening specials with the composed fluency of someone reading from a script they'd long since memorized. They assumed the composure was performance. They assumed someone like her had made peace with her station, or worse, that she'd never imagined a different one. They were wrong on both counts. Hazel Fenwick had, until 4 years ago, been completing a doctorate in comparative linguistics at McGill. She had spoken at a conference in Lyon. She had a published paper on the morphological evolution of Old French dialects in Atlantic Canada. She had been, by every measure her department used, extraordinary. Then her mother's diagnosis had come, then the second opinion, then the third, then the money ran out. She didn't tell people this. There was no reason to. The tables needed clearing, the wine needed pouring, and her mother needed the medication dollars a month that cost 460 € a month after the coverage gap in her provincial plan. The PhD could wait. The paper could wait. Everything could wait, except the things that couldn't. She set a glass of Meursault in front of the woman at table 7 and refilled the water at table 3 without being asked, and she was crossing toward the service corridor when the party arrived at table 12. She knew before she reached them that it was going to be one of those nights. There were 4 of them, 3 men and a woman, and they moved through the room the way certain people do, with the particular confidence of those who have never had to wait for anything and have come to mistake that accident of birth for a character trait. The woman was wearing something architectural in ivory silk. Suits only fit suits tend when they're made specifically for you, and the one in front, the one the maître d'hôtel was practically bowing towards, was... Hazel recognized him. Most people in Montreal's business community would have. Bryce Capital had its name on 2 buildings downtown, and a wing of a hospital that ironically bore no relation to the one where her mother was being treated. Callum Bryce was 53, silver-haired, and possessed of the kind of self-assurance that had long ago crossed the line into something else entirely. She'd served him once before, 8 months ago on a night she hadn't thought about since because she'd trained herself not to carry things that had no use. He didn't remember her. Of course he didn't. "We'll need the private alcove," he said to the maitre d'. Not as a request. The alcove was already reserved. Hazel knew this because she'd set it herself 2 hours ago for a party of 6 celebrating an anniversary. She watched Francois, the maître, absorb this information with the expression of a man calculating the cost of 2 different mistakes. Bryce made the calculation easier by sliding something across the reservation stand, not overtly, just the practiced movement of a man who had discovered early in life that most problems were really just pricing problems. The anniversary party was relocated to a table near the window. The alcove became Bryce's. Hazel's was assigned to the alcove. She didn't ask why. She already knew why. "You're the best on the floor tonight," Francois told her quietly, which was his way of saying he was sorry without actually saying it. She picked up her order pad and walked over. The table settled into itself over the first 20 minutes, the particular choreography of important people reminding each other how important they are, each anecdote calibrated to land slightly above the last. Hazel poured water, described the amuse-bouche, answered questions about the menu with the precision she brought to everything. She recommended the bison tartare to the man on Bryce's left who had asked for something that wasn't the usual. She suggested the burgundy without being asked when she saw Bryce examine the wine list with the expression of a man who already knew what he wanted, but enjoyed the theatre of choosing. He ordered the Chambol Musigny. He did not look at her when he said it. It was during the soup course that it started. Bryce was midway through a story about a deal that had apparently collapsed under the weight of the other party's incompetence, and the two younger men, junior partners, Hazel had decided, based on the quality of their listening, were nodding in the synchronized way of people who have learned that agreement is the fastest path through any room. The woman who had been introduced as Sylvie and who had said almost nothing except to order the scallops was turning her wine glass slowly by the stem. Hazel arrived to clear the soup bowls. "These people," Bryce was saying, gesturing with his bread roll at some imagined opponent, "they don't understand that the world doesn't owe them a seat at the table just because they showed up." He paused as Hazel reached across to lift his bowl. "Tell me, was the bisque warm enough for you, or merely room temperature like the service?" She looked at him. "I apologize if the temperature wasn't to your liking. I can speak to the kitchen about." "It was fine," he said, in the tone of someone for whom fine was the lowest denomination of acceptable. Then, as she turned to collect the next bowl, he said something else, something half turned away, in the direction of the junior partner on his left, in French. Not the French that most Anglophones in Montreal deployed socially, the careful, courteous French of someone trying. This was deliberate, colloquial, dismissive. He said, in Quebecois French, with the particular accent of someone who had learned the language purely as a social instrument, "Elle fait du mieux qu'elle peut avec ce qu'elle a. C'est tout ce qu'on peut espérer de ce genre de gens. She does her best with what she has. It's all one can expect from that kind of person." The junior partner smiled, the careful smile of complicity. Hazel set the bowl on the tray. She had grown up in Chicoutimi. She had spoken French before she spoke English. She had written her doctoral thesis in 3 languages, of which French was the one that felt most like home. She didn't say any of this. She said, in the measured professional tone she used for everything, "I'll have your next course up shortly." And she walked back toward the service corridor without changing her pace. In the kitchen, she set the tray down and stood for exactly 4 seconds with her eyes closed. The sous-chef, a compact man named Remy, who had worked the line for 11 years and had seen everything, glanced at her and then glanced away. "Table 12, she said. "Bryce, yes, you want me to salt his consommé a little extra?" "No," she said, and she almost smiled. "But, thank you." She went back out. The main course arrived at table 12:40 minutes into the evening. Hazel served it herself. The bison for the junior partners, the scallops for Sylvie, the rack of venison for Bryce, requested medium rare. She set each plate with the same attention she brought to every table, because the food deserved it even if the people sometimes didn't. Bryce examined the venison the way he examined most things, as though it had been presented for his judgment rather than his nourishment. "Where did you study?" he asked. She looked up. He was looking at her now, with the particular curiosity of a man who has decided that someone is interesting enough to investigate. "I'm sorry." "You heard me." He cut into the venison. "You don't carry yourself like someone who's been doing this since secondary school. Where did you study?" "McGill," she said. "Linguistics." He nodded, the way people nod when they're filing information rather than responding to it. "Didn't finish." "I'm still enrolled," she said, which was technically true. She hadn't formally withdrawn. She'd simply stopped going. There was a difference, though she wasn't sure the university saw it that way. He tasted the venison, set down his fork, picked up his wine, and then, in the conversational register of someone thinking out loud more than speaking to anyone in particular, he said, in Latin, which she understood the moment the first syllable left his mouth, "Bona intentio, param effectus, ut semper apud mediocris, good intention, little result, as always with the mediocre." He was looking at the wine glass when he said it. The junior partner who had laughed at the French comment blinked. The other one looked at the tablecloth. Sylvie's hand paused on her wine glass for exactly 1 second, then resumed its slow rotation. Callum Bryce had learned Latin at Upper Canada College, which he mentioned frequently enough that it had become part of the texture of his public identity. He used it the way some people use a second language abroad, as a private register, a signal, a door that locked people out. He had used it in boardrooms and at dinner parties and at his son's school fundraiser. He had never, in his experience, had it come back to him from someone he had deployed it against. Hazel looked at him. She looked at him the way she had looked at her doctoral supervisor when he'd challenged a translation in her thesis defense, with the absolute calm of someone standing on solid ground. And she said, in Latin so clean and unhurried, it sounded like a choice rather than a reaction, "Mediocritatem sape confundimus cum humiliate, sed ehorum tuum interlego, difficil et discernir inter eos qui nihil habent et eos qui omnia celerunt." We often confuse mediocrity with humility. "But I understand your error. It is difficult to distinguish between those who have nothing and those who have chosen to hide everything." The silence that followed was the kind that has a specific weight to it. Bryce's fork was halfway to his plate. It stayed there. One of the junior partners made a sound that was not quite a cough, and not quite anything else. Sylvie looked up from her wine glass for the first time all evening. She looked at Hazel. And the expression on her face, not surprise exactly, but something adjacent to recognition, was the one that Hazel would remember afterward, long after the rest of the night had resolved itself into its various consequences. "You," Bryce started. "Your venison will get cold," Hazel said. "It's better warm." And she turned and walked back towards the service station with the same unhurried step she'd used all evening. Behind her she heard nothing for a long moment. Then she heard Sylvie say, very quietly, "Callum." She didn't hear what came next. At the service station, Remy was watching her with the expressionless attention of a man recalibrating something. "Everything okay? Everything's fine," she said. "I need a minute. Take 2, he said. "I'll watch 12. She went to the break room and sat down on the wooden chair by the lockers and put her hands flat on her knees and breathed. Not because she was upset, because she had kept herself completely level for so long that the moment the pressure dropped, her body needed to remember what stillness felt like. Her phone had 3 missed calls from the hospital. She looked at the screen and felt the familiar tightening in her chest that she had learned to acknowledge, because the alternative was not functioning, and she couldn't afford not to function. She called back the nurse on her mother's ward, a woman named Denise, who had been consistently kind in the way that only people who have seen real can sustain. told her that her mother had had a good day. That the new medication was showing some effect, that the doctor wanted to see Hazel on Friday, which was either good news or the kind of news delivered in person. "She asked about you," Denise said. "She wanted to know if you'd eaten." Hazel looked at the half-eaten granola bar on top of her locker. "Tell her yes," she said. She went back out to the floor. Table 12 had been quiet in her absence, in the way that rooms are quiet after something has shifted in them. Bryce was eating. The junior partners were eating. Sylvie was looking at her phone or pretending to. Nobody looked up when Hazel returned except Sylvie, who met her eyes briefly with an expression that was, as far as Hazel could interpret it, something close to apology on someone else's behalf. The rest of the meal passed without incident. Hazel described the dessert menu. She brought the tartelette aux pommes that Sylvie ordered and the cognac that Bryce requested without comment. She presented the bill with the same neutral efficiency she'd used all evening. Bryce looked at the bill. He looked at her. He didn't say anything. He placed his card on the folder and looked away. The junior partners left first, collecting their coats with the purposeful speed of men escaping something. Sylvie lingered at the coat check while Bryce was on his phone, already reconstructing the evening into some acceptable version of itself. Sylvie turned to Hazel. "Your thesis," she said, "the one on Atlantic French dialects." I read it. Hazel went still. "I'm on the advisory board at the Fondation pour la langue française," Sylvie said. Her name, Hazel now recalled, was Sylvie Charbonneau. She had been in the news 2 years ago in connection with a major heritage language initiative. "We've been looking for someone to lead a project on Akkadian linguistic heritage. The position comes with a research stipend, health coverage, and a path to finishing your doctorate through Université de Montreal's affiliated program." She paused. "I've had your CV on my desk since September. I didn't know how to find you." Hazel looked at her. "How did you? Your supervisor at McGill is a colleague of mine," Sylvie said simply. "He speaks very highly of you. He mentioned that circumstances had intervened." She held out a card. "The position is still open. If you want it, call me before Friday." She pulled on her coat and went to join Bryce at the door, who had ended his call and was standing with the look of a man who had decided to be somewhere else. Hazel stood at the coat check holding the card. It was cream-colored, heavy stock. Embossed letters. The kind of card that existed in a world she had not inhabited for 4 years, but had never stopped understanding. She turned it over. Sylvie's direct line was handwritten on the back in the slightly irregular script of someone who writes quickly and often. Francois appeared at her elbow. "Everything all right with 12? "Yes," Hazel said. Everything was fine. She tucked the card into her apron pocket, next to her mother's CT results, and went to clear the table. The alcove at table 12 looked different after a party leaves. The ordered disorder of a meal that has been eaten, and a conversation that has happened and cannot be unhappened. The glasses had rings at the bottom where the wine had settled. One of the junior partners had left a pen. Bryce's side of the table had the particular arrangement of someone and never quite recovered his position. She stacked the plates with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She picked up the pen. She set the chairs back. At the center of Bryce's place setting, she noticed the napkin had left folded. Not carelessly. Almost precise, as if someone had needed something to do with their hands. She cleared it with everything else and went back to the kitchen. The rest of the shift passed the way most shifts pass when something significant has happened. In a kind of muffled continuation, the ordinary machinery of the evening running on after the moment that mattered. She served a birthday dessert with a candle. She recommended a digestif to a table of 4 from Toronto who couldn't decide. She tallied her section at close and helped Rémi wipe down the line and said goodnight to François, who was already reviewing the next day's reservations with the focused attention of a man who finds comfort in logistics. She took the 24 bus home. It was after midnight, and the snow had accumulated seriously now. 3 or 4 inches on the sidewalks, the city under it quieter than it ever managed to be during the day. Through the fogged window she watched Côte des Neiges scroll past, the hospital lit up against the dark. In her apartment, a 1-bedroom on Avenue Gatineau that she'd shared with a roommate until 8 months ago and managed alone since, with careful arithmetic, she put the kettle on and sat at the kitchen table. She took the card out of her apron pocket and set it next to the folded CT results. She looked at both of them for a long time. The kettle boiled. She made tea and didn't drink it, and then drank it cold 20 minutes later, while she sat reading the same paragraph of an old linguistics journal. She kept on the table for the evenings when she needed to remember what thinking felt like. She thought about her mother, asking if she'd eaten. She thought about the silence at tables 12 after the Latin. She thought about Bryce's expression in that silence, not anger, precisely, which was what she'd expected. Something more disorienting. The specific look of a man who has been somewhere familiar and found the walls in different places. She thought about Sylvie Charbonneau's handwriting on the back of the card, the slightly irregular letters of someone who writes quickly. And often she thought about her thesis, 87 pages she hadn't opened in 4 years, sitting in a folder on a hard drive she kept in the drawer of her bedside table because she hadn't been able to bring herself to delete it. She opened the drawer. She opened the folder. The first page had the McGill letterhead at the top, and below it, in the formal register of academic documents, phonological shift and community identity in Acadian French, a longitudinal analysis of 4 coastal communities, her name below that, her supervisor's name, a date that was now 4 years in the past. She read the abstract. She'd forgotten how good it was. Not with vanity, she understood her work clearly enough to be honest about it. Just with the particular recognition of something that had been set down and not yet finished. She picked up her phone. She considered calling her mother, who would be asleep. She set the phone down. She looked at Sylvie's card. She looked at the thesis. She got up and found a pen in the kitchen drawer and a piece of paper, and she sat back down and began, in the methodical way she did most things, to write down the questions she would need answered before Friday. The stipend amount, the scope of the research, the terms of the doctoral affiliation, what health coverage meant specifically, and whether it included the medications her mother was on. She filled one side of the paper and turned it over. Somewhere in the middle of the second side, something shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but with the quiet inevitability of a season changing, the arithmetic of her life, which had for 4 years been organized around subtraction. What she gave up, what she deferred, what she held in reserve, began, tentatively, to consider the possibility of a different kind of equation. She thought about the bus home through the snow. She thought about Denise, the nurse, saying she asked about you. She thought about Rémi saying take 2 without asking why. She thought about a dining room full of people who had looked at her and seen exactly what they expected to see. She thought about the expression on Callum Bryce's face in the moment after the Latin. Not the anger that came after, not the performance of recovery, but the instant before all of that, when his eyes had done the thing that eyes do when the room has changed, and the body hasn't caught up yet. She put down the pen. She picked up Sylvie's card and turned it over and looked at the handwritten number. Then she went to her bedside drawer again and took out the hard drive and plugged it into her laptop and opened the document with 87 pages that belonged to her and no one else, and she read it from the beginning, all the way through, for the first time in 4 years. It was almost 4 in the morning when she finished. The tea was long cold. Outside, the snow had stopped and the street was very quiet. She sat for a while in the quiet. Then she found the number she had for her McGill supervisor, Dr. Arsenault, who she had not spoken to in 14 months, and she composed a text that said only, "I think I'm ready to come back. Would you have time to speak this week?" She looked at it for a moment. She sent it. Then she closed her laptop and turned off the light and lay down on top of the covers without getting undressed, because it was almost morning and she had a shift the next day, and she lay there in the dark with the particular feeling of someone who has just picked up something heavy they set down a long time ago and found, to their surprise, that they still remember exactly how it fits in their hands.